Welcome to the Timescales Interviews. I'm Grego, your host, and today I have a very special guest, the lead project supervisor, as well as the lead editor for Wedge, the series by Arcbeetle Press. This right here is none other than the extraordinary Hunter O'Connell. Hi, Hunter. How are you today?
Hey, I'm doing great. Thank you. What
Yeah,
about you?
it's doing good. Thank you. I've been looking forward to this, and it's really nice to meet you. Um,
Oh, thank you.
this is being recorded in California and also in the United States. Am I correct that you were here in the US?
Yes, I am currently in Iowa, Des Moines, Iowa.
Okay. And I saw you mentioned that you had gone to a Doctor Who convention recently in Chicago.
Yes, that was Chicago TARDIS. It had too many people. So it had Rachel Talalay, I believe is how her name is pronounced. Um, and it was the first time that the Star Beast had been shown, was at this convention, the first time in the US, and she actually had to get confirmation from Russell. Apparently she has his number. And so we at the convention were the first people in the US who could see it. Obviously it was streamed on Twitch and everything, unofficially, but this is the first official time that the show was screened in the US.
Oh,
Um,
that's awesome.
yeah, so there was her, there was um Caroline Ford. You were mentioning Katie Manning earlier. Katie Manning. Um, three doctors. We got Colin Baker, um, Peter Davison, and Sylvester McCoy, as well as a few people who have played doctors on the audios, like the person who played the War Doctor in The War Doctor Begins, who I forget the name of. So,
Okay, well, that sounds like it was really fun. Do you do conventions often?
um, this is the first one I've been to in a while. I used to go to them very, very often, but the the coronavirus kind of threw a spanner in the works
Yeah.
of, yeah. And this is the first one I've been to in ages. So,
Okay, great. Now there's two things that I wanted to talk to you about today.
mhm.
The one being the very obvious, the characters Wedge, which I know that I'm mispronouncing. I can't actually pronounce it with a C. Reg and Roz Forrester, and the stories that you are working on with these characters as a Doctor Who spinoff. Um, and then I also wanted to do a little bit of a section about Meet Your Author, where people can get to know you and a little bit about your Doctor Who background. That way they can relate to you a little bit as fans. And what I wanted to ask right off the bat, these characters, Wedge and Roz, my first experience would have been reading the original Sin, which was written by Andy Lane, an absolutely outstanding author who doesn't only do Doctor Who stories. And the second would have been Trial of the Time Machine. And that was an audio adventure by Big Finish, I believe. And that is where I put these characters together and came to enjoy them and wanted to see more of them. And what I'm wondering is were these characters actually created by author Andrew Lane, the talented author that writes Doctor Who, yes, but he also does Sherlock Holmes. Uh, were these characters created by Andy?
The funny thing is, yes, they were created, but they weren't created with the intention of being companions. They were created as one-off characters for Original Sin, the novel. Um, and the range editor, who I believe at the time was not Peter Dogville Evans, but I could be wrong about that. But a new range editor was really, really impressed with how nicely they bounced off each other and how nicely they bounced off with Benny Summerfield. Um, and yeah, so it was basically just a very good coincidence that he wrote these characters not intended to be companions, and they worked so well as companions in the novels. Um, and so that's actually one of the reasons why I'm able to use Chris and occasionally have Roz in a few stories, before her death in the novel So Violet Sin. It's because Chris and Roz, well, not only are they not being used by Big Finish, but they were never intended to be companions, so the BBC can't claim ownership of them. Um, it's a similar situation to the Brigadier and how Candy Jar Books is continuing his adventures before Unit and even in the middle of his Unit days. Um, they're using the Brigadier because he was intended to be a side character. He was never intended to be, a continuing companion of the Doctor. Um, but Chris is an interesting, or a really interesting thing because in his last novel, Lungbarrow, he was basically, he had his final farewell to the Doctor, and he went on to work for the Time Lords under President Romana. Um, and that's kind of where we pick up is him with his, like in the middle of his adventures with working for the Time Lords and working for not just under Lady Romana, but under quite a few different presidents and different Time Lord kind of factions here and there. Um, and it's really a story about recovering from the great daring escapes that he made with the Doctor and recovering from the loss that was his good friend slash semi occasional love interest Roz. Um, and it's really about him learning to love himself. It's all about him um, basically rediscovering what made him Chris Cwej.
Okay. Now, you're mentioning a very rare book there, Lungbarrow.
Mm-hmm.
It's my understanding that that book was only available for a very short amount of time because the publisher's license for Doctor Who ended. And that's a book that I do not have. If you can find those on sale, for sale, occasionally, they're never on sale. That right there, I believe, is the most expensive book that can be found as a Doctor Who collectible. I think if you look on eBay, those things sell for $300-400 when you can even find them. Do you have Lungbarrow?
Yes, yes.
Wow.
I used to have an original copy, but then I sold that um, in order to. I think it was to. I don't even remember what the money was used for, but I sold my original copy, and then my good friend, who is also working on Quedge the series, um, she gave me kind of a custom printing of Long Barrow. The interesting thing is the book itself, like the original physical printing, was around for only a very short time. But the thing is, it was published in a kind of expanded edition with new material on like the old BBC website. And so you can find those easily on like web archives or whatever. You can find the online expanded version to read wherever. Yeah, so it's pretty interesting because only a few books um, from the New Adventures actually got web exclusive releases on the BBC website. So it's kind of interesting. Um, Other than that, yeah, your best bet is to either get a custom printing or get really, really lucky. So,
Right. Yeah.
mm,
I saw one that was listed on eBay for $25. And when I went to
mm,
click on it to buy it, somebody had already bought it. So that would have been that seems to have been a situation where somebody that was selling it had no idea the value of it. But so going back to these characters, Wedge and Roz, do you recall the first time that you encountered them in a story, something that piqued your interest? Would it have been in the original Sin by Andy Lane?
No, actually, it was a different novel in the Faction Paradox series, which featured Chris. And that was how do I, it's not necessarily a Faction Paradox book. It's kind of tangentially related to the events in that series. But it was originally for the new adventures that were printed after the Doctor had already left, and Benny Summerfield was the basic. She was the main character for like 23 or so books. One of those books did not feature Benny. It featured Chris as one of the main characters. And so it was basically he was the villain of this book. Usually he's a wide-eyed puppy dog kind of, like, oh, what's this, Doctor? That kind of character. But in this, we start to see a facet of him that we never actually saw. And this book was called Dead Romance. It was written by Lawrence Miles, and it was about Chris basically, I don't want to spoil anything, but he meets a woman. They basically go on adventures with Chris taking the role of the Doctor, and we find out that Chris has been basically manipulating this young woman in order to fulfill some sort of agenda that his Time Lords, or as they're called in the books, great houses, wish to, he's basically using her as a means to an end. And it's a lot worse than what I'm describing, but I don't want to spoil anything. It's a really, really good book, told entirely through kind of archival pieces of this young woman's diary. Um, as she meets Chris, as she knows more about Chris, and as she learns what her role in Chris's whole thing is. So,
Okay. Now, did you ever think back then, when first experiencing this story, that hey, I want to write some stories with these characters?
yes, Chris was such an interesting character because at the time I was going through some really tough stuff, and he was going through some stuff as well in this book, and it just felt like kind of a sci-fi version of the events that I was going through in my life. And
Really?
yeah, obviously I wasn't, acting in the kind of malevolent way that Chris was, but I was going through the similar emotions and regrets that he was. And so it was really um, almost like he was speaking to me in this book. It was like, um, I hadn't read Original Sin at the time. And once I did, I was like, oh, so that's how he met the Doctor. That's how he
Mhm.
kind of, was behaving, quote unquote, like the Doctor. But obviously bastardizing the Doctor's intent every step he goes in this novel. Um, and then in Original Sin, he's a lot more positive, a lot more kind, a lot more receptive. And it made me think, okay, I got to read all these books and figure out how he came to the point that he was in Dead Romance.
Okay.
Um, yeah.
Okay, excellent. That right there was similar to the feeling that I got when listening to the Big Finish story. What was that? The Trial of a Time Machine.
Mhm.
And I recall uh, it being he was a very strong companion,
Mhm.
and I am I correct that by the time Big Finish was using the character that Wedge was a companion at the time?
Chris was a companion in the early to mid 90s. So, and Big Finish started using him in, I think, 2012. So, yeah, he was a companion for a long, long time before Big Finish ever got to use him. I think they used a few clones of Cwej in a Benny Summerfield audio, but they never used the real Chris. The real Chris was only used, I think the first time they used him was in Original Sin, where he's played by Travis Oliver, the audio adaptation of Original Sin, and he is played by Travis Oliver, who is also in um, Gridlock, which was, as you know, a 10th Doctor TV story. And a few people have speculated that the version or the character that Travis was playing in that is actually one of Chris's clones that the Time Lords made of him. So it's just kind of a
Okay.
silly, just kind of a silly idea. But um, the yeah, he's been around for ages, and Big Finish only just recently are starting to kind of see, oh, we can use this guy for a lot more in terms of when he was with the Doctor. In the novels, he had latent psychic abilities. He was, a big, strong, tough guy with a heart of gold, and he loved tinkering with different electronic parts. He loved learning about mechanical things. He had a lot of different interesting facets to his character, and I feel like that's something that Big Finish only just recently realized we can use this for a lot more than we've been using before. So
Okay. Now you said clones of Wedge?
that's a story and a half. So in the novels, or at least in Faction Paradox, Chris is, a very um, loyal servant to the Time Lords because the Doctor basically, said goodbye, and he was very appreciative of the Time Lords in this novel. Chris has taken to appreciating them by proxy because the Doctor is a great role model to Chris. Um, in the novels, the Time Lords have basically gotten into a war, not the Time War, but a different war with an unseen, unknowable enemy. Um, this is right, like a little bit before the Time War. It's like before the one with the Daleks happens, and this war is um, basically a precursor to the last Great Time War. Um, the in this original war, Chris has basically um, been super loyal, and the Time Lords have figured out, we can use this guy for more than what he's giving us right now. So they create basically time clones, basically cutting out his, specific uh, versions of himself from his timeline, and giving them kind of autonomy, giving them kind of a life of their own. Like slivers of his timeline are being cut out, and yeah. Oh, and Andy's here.
Oh, what in the
Oh,
world?
that's funny.
Um,
Hello, Andy.
yeah, something's wrong here. Uh,
Gosh, what could be happening? Oh, look at that. Look at that handsome face.
I don't think this is actually Andy Lane.
No, that's
Says
him.
says he's connecting to audio.
Ah, here we are.
This I don't Hunter, I think something's wrong. I don't think this is actually Andy Lane. It, I think this might be an AI version.
Yeah, that's what I'm thinking. Yeah.
This is the AI version of Andy Lane. What the hell does the real one look like?
Well, something's wrong here. I'm not convinced. So somebody's playing a huge joke. Are you doing this, Hunter?
Oh yeah, this is me. I have my computer right here. And I'm just using it to conjure up this AI facsimile of Andy.
Well,
I've got to say, I am not an AI copy.
see, I knew it right there because the thing is, after I interviewed Andy Lane last year, there's no way that he would put himself through something like this again. So
Good course not.
Hunter, is there anything you can do to verify that this is actually Andy? Can you ask him something that only he would know?
How do you pronounce Chris's last name?
um, yeah, Chris's last name should be pronounced Cwej,
There
because
we go.
I used to know a girl. I used to work with a lady whose name was Emma Cwej, but everyone would call it Emma Cwej because nobody could be bothered with the Cwej bit. Is that
Well,
is that
there you go.
right?
I think this is the real Andy.
Well,
Call it a
You
hunch.
think it is?
Wikipedia is great for answering things like that.
All right.
I'm still not quite convinced here.
Maybe during the course of the interview we'll get some more information.
Well, you know what? Since Andy has a moment to stop by, why don't you interview him?
All right.
Go right ahead. Go right ahead.
All right, I have a lot of questions. So Andy,
Yes.
I was really curious if you were, say, in my shoes and you were wanting to continue the adventures of Chris and be the editor of this series, what do you think would be a good story to tell with Chris, working for the Time Lords under a different name?
I think from what I've seen, you are doing pretty much what I would do, which is to put Cwej in situations. Sorry, Cwej. I've got to remember that. Put Cwej into situations that morally test him. I don't know if I ever said, but some years ago, I was talking to, I can't remember, it's an American guy, and I cannot remember. Sorry, it's a bit insulting. It's an American guy, of course.
Hey, you're in the room with two Americans, man.
Yeah, I know. But he's got a small publishing thing. He does like I Who. Yeah, no, my brain's gone blank. But he asked me, and this is probably about 15 years ago.
Lars Pearson.
Yes, Lars.
Yeah.
That was it.
Yeah, he's in my city, actually. He's right by me.
Oh, right. Lovely guy. I've met him and I met his wife.
Oh, he's great. He is amazing. Yeah. The main interviewer has left the building. Yeah.
Anyway, sorry. What I was going to say was, Lars contacted me and asked about doing a series of adjudicators books with Cwej and Forrester. And I wrote a kind of 2-page proposal to sum it up. And basically my whole thing was, it's about moral choices. It's about trying to impose morality, or at least enforce morality in a complicated galaxy. If you've got an alien race where cannibalism is completely legitimate and accepted, how do you then, as an adjudicator in that case, stop it? Or when those cannibals come to Earth, how do you stop them continuing, or should you?
Yeah, that's interesting, because there is a story very similar to that in Cwej Down the Middle. I'm just going to keep calling him Cwej. I can't be bothered.
Yeah, I think you should.
Okay. But yeah, there is a story in there where basically Chris has, in the novels, or at least in the later novels, Chris has these kind of time clones, where basically like he's his timeline has been basically spliced and cut up into different individual clones with a life of their own, and in this short story, Chris is basically stranded on a planet way out in the middle of nowhere, where there's like a broken, malfunctioning clone machine, and these Cwej clones, these Cwejin, as I call them, or as the novels call them, are basically pumping out these clones that have lost their minds and are starting to eat each other. And it's just like kind of I don't want to say like a Dune thing, but it is kind of like on a planet with spice, but the spice is Chris.
Okay.
So that is I don't want to spoil the big surprise, but yeah, there's a huge giant malevolent version of Chris that's basically orchestrating the whole thing. And Chris just happened, like the real Chris just happened to show up in the middle of it. And Chris is having to figure out, okay, what do I do here? Do I just go along for the ride and wait to go back to where I was, because he's just like fallen asleep and now he's, on this planet, and, basically his consciousness is it's like lifted from his body and been put on this planet while his body is still wherever it was, lying down at. And he's having to figure out, do I wait to go home or do I put a stop to this? And yeah, I mean, that's, you mentioning the cannibalism thing is actually pretty interesting. A few other new adventures that I'm blanking on the names of did the same thing. Or was it? It might have been a few missing adventures. I don't know. But yeah, one of those ranges did do something along those lines, and it wasn't gruesome, but it was weird.
Yeah.
No, wait, I'm thinking of the audio visuals. I'm thinking of one of the audio visual stories.
Oh my God, that's going back a bit.
Yeah, that's a deep cut. Yeah, I can't remember which one, but yeah.
Yeah. So from my point of view, you're doing exactly the thing that I would have done, and push Cwej to his limits, and actually address fundamental questions. What is morality? Is there such a thing as a universal morality? And should we be allowed to enforce it? So great, continue on.
Okay. I mean, that's the main reason the book is called Down the Middle. It's him being down the middle of good and evil. He is a man, segmented between his two objectives, to be good and to do the right thing. And those sometimes can be mutually exclusive. So, remind me of your name. Timescales. I forget your name.
Yeah, Greg. Yeah,
Greg.
Greg or Greg. Yeah, either one is fine.
You're still there. I thought you'd gone away somewhere.
Yeah, I just left you guys on your own there for a while. So Andy, what are you up to these days? It's great to see you again. Can I assume that you're writing?
Yes, I'm writing. I'm actually writing for a German publisher, believe it or not. So it's quite a bizarre thing. About a year and a half, no more than that, 3 years ago, I was contacted by a German publisher, and they said, "Oh, your young Sherlock Holmes books are really popular in Germany. Can you create a new series for us?" So I did 3-book series for them, and they just come back and got me to do another new series, 4 books. And I think the people in England think I've died.
So is it all in German?
They are translated in German. I can't speak German. Well,
Okay.
you would have thought logistically it would have been easier to get a German writer to write something, but for some reason, I think it's a bit like the way that American and British music transfers around the world. There's something about the English language that means it's easier to write stories, I think.
This reminds me of that one Italian man. I can't remember the name of his act, but basically he did a song that was complete gibberish, but in an American accent, to prove that anything with an American accent will sell great in Italy, and it became #1 for like a few months. So, sounds about right.
But I know that the British accents here are very well respected by Americans. Take Patrick Stewart, for example. And Andy, I would take that as a high honor if Germany is reaching out to you to do young Sherlock Holmes. Then apparently they consider you to be the top Sherlock Holmes writer in Germany.
That is flattering and rather scary, I think. Tuesday of this week, I spent all day in a school about 400 miles from where I live, and about 100 miles away from my mum lives, and just talking to the kids there and giving presentations on Sherlock Holmes himself, and then the young Sherlock Holmes books, and they're actually using the first of my young Sherlock Holmes books in the English classes. They read a chapter a week, and all the kids were asking me questions I couldn't answer.
Could you not answer because you didn't know the answer, or was it because you couldn't spoil it?
Oh no, it's because I didn't know the answer. I'd forgotten it.
Okay.
One of the other English teachers had apparently come up. He was teaching his kids that there was some kind of bizarre symbolism in my books about lanterns, and every time I had a lantern, because it's Victorian England, every time there was a lantern, it got knocked over and something was set on fire, and somehow this is symbolic. It's not. It's just that I kept on forgetting that I was doing it.
Yeah, that's one of the things is one of my good friends who is reading Down the Middle has mentioned that you always like to put in spontaneous human combustion into your stuff. You put it into all-consuming fire. You put it into your story for Down the Middle, flickering flame. You put it into a lot of different things. Yeah.
Oh yeah, and Greg, it was you that pointed out that food makes a large appearance in most of the stuff that I do.
That's exactly what I was just going to mention. Andy also puts food into a lot of his stories, and it makes them very real to me because people do eat. And if you look back at the let's take the original Star Trek series, for example, you never see anybody eating, nor do you see them going to the restroom. Who knows if the Enterprise even had a restroom? But I think there's only one original Star Trek episode that implied that people were eating, but it didn't actually show them eating. It was some Klingons sitting in I guess, an Enterprise pantry or something like that. Yeah. And Andy's inclusion of food is not only something that makes the stories feel real, but it's also from a foodie standpoint. You can tell that the author himself is actually a foodie.
Yeah, absolutely.
Look, I'm very conscious that this is Hunter's interview, not mine. So I don't want to stay around and hijack it. Happy to talk to either of you at any time, of course. But I'm going to duck out now, and you can keep on talking to Hunter.
Okay, right, Andy, thank you very much for stopping by. I have one last question. Don't you have another Doctor Who story coming out with BBC Audio? Or can you talk about that? You do?
Yes, I've got the contract. I have yet to write it.
Okay.
It's going to be the Eighth Doctor with James McFarlane, the reporter again.
Okay.
Meeting up in Dublin in the and also the west coast of Ireland on the bit where if you just set sail, you'd hit America if you kept on going. And as before, you know, I've done vampires, I've done Frankenstein's monster, I've done the Wolfman. This is going to be a little bit zombies and maybe a little bit Loch Ness monster.
Okay.
So it's going to have Zygons then?
No Zygons.
Oh.
Okay. Well, I'm still waiting for the doctor to visit Mount Fuji, Andy.
The 19th view of Mount Fuji. It's got to be called that.
Right. Okay. Hey, thanks for stopping by. It was great to see you. I know that Hunter was definitely surprised.
Yeah, I was. I didn't realize. Thank you so much, Andy.
That is okay. And Hunter and Greg, both of you keep on talking to me on whatever platforms we end up talking on, okay?
Absolutely.
Okay, thank you so much.
Right. Take care, guys.
Okay, you too, Andy. Take care, man.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. All right.
Well, wasn't that a shock?
That was. He's still in here, apparently. Is he listening in, do you think?
It's possible, yeah.
Okay.
So, I actually invited Andy yesterday, and I was not sure that if he would actually have time. So that's wonderful that he was able to stop by. So, and where were we before Andy stopped in?
Oh, we were talking about Chris or something, probably.
Yeah, something about Chris. So, let me ask you this: how in the world did you become the lead project supervisor for Arc Beetle?
Oh, there Andy goes, but that's a long story.
There goes the AI version of Andy.
Yeah,
that actually wasn't Andy, we know.
Yeah, maybe the real Andy will show up. Yeah,
that would be a shock.
Yeah. So that's a really long story because in 2018, I think it was around Christmas 2018, I reached out to Andy on a whim, and said, I really, really, really loved Original Sin. I loved All Consuming Fire. I love all your novels for Doctor Who. I was wondering if I could use Chris for a few things, and he's like, absolutely. So at that
Nice.
point, I was like, okay, I'm gonna make a series. Just you know, um, at that point, I was really, really interested in um doing something with. I mean, if you look up arc numbers on TV tropes, you'll kind of get what I mean. But like using numbers as kind of symbols for different story beats. So I wanted the first book to have um, uh, four four syllables. Um, four syllables in the title. So down the middle, and then I wanted the third book to count down basically to three, and that's why the third book is. Second book is going to have three, hidden truths. That's three syllables. Third book is going to have two, and the last book is going to have one. Um, so that's kind of what I was trying to do. So I knew I wanted to make a 4-book series. And how I kind of got around to that is I reached out to a bunch of people. The first call for submissions I put out on Gallifrey Base, and the very first person to contact me the day of was James Hornby, who is probably my best friend at the moment. He's a great, great, great guy. Um, and he and I were talking, about like, oh, here's the idea for this series. I put out a pitch, like a pitch Bible or whatever. He was
Mhm.
like, okay, here's my idea for a story, and I'm like, oh, we're going to do a short story anthology now. So then I
Okay,
put
hey,
out
hang on just a second here. You said a pitch Bible? What does that mean?
basically just like giving the criteria for pitching things. So
Okay.
so like, like this is the word count of, this, that, or the other thing. This is the characters. This is the events that will go on throughout the series. Um, that sort of thing. So he sent me a story basically within 2 days, I think. And it was really, really good. Like it was amazing. It really captured what I wanted to do with this. Um, and I was like, okay, we're going to have to do like a huge, huge anthology. Um, so I got like, I think it was like 26 stories, a whole bunch of artists to do illustrations, interior and exterior. And uh, and so, then when it came to Arc Press, I was looking for a publisher. I was like, am I going to self-publish this? How much money could I make from self-publishing this? Obviously, that's not the main concern, but um, I wanted to make something to make back what I was putting in, because I don't even want to think about how much I put in. Um, and so I was like, okay, I need a publisher. So then I was like looking around. Arc Beetle. Arc Beetle did something with Faction Paradox for the 20th anniversary of Faction Paradox. They could be a good idea. They've done a whole bunch of stuff. At that point, they had only done like 3 things with Doctor Who concepts, but I was like, this could be a really good idea. So Faction Paradox crossovers were basically what got me to think, okay, they would be a good idea. I reached out to the guy, James Wilder, and they said, um, we I would love to do this. I'll help you every step of the way. And they were super, super kind. Eventually it got to the point where I was, reaching out to a whole bunch of people to get, concepts and rights to use things. Iris Wildtime was in Andy Lane's story for Down the Middle, a few other things. And I was reaching out to different spin-off producers like Real Time and Obverse and Candy Jar, um, and even BBV, which opened up a whole can of worms I don't want to go into because the guy went off the deep end. Uh, but um, but yeah, I was reaching out to all these different Doctor Who people from basically every single um, era of the show's wilderness years. and I got a whole bunch of different rights to different things and used them in a way that I thought would be engaging and rewarding for the audience that it was made for, which is, people who have read the books and listened to the audios, the weird ones like you and I. So that's basically what happened. It's just like it was a whole bunch of different circumstances, a bunch of toppling dominoes that led to the best case scenario. And that's how I became the project supervisor, is because I just reached out to a whole bunch of people and they all came back with, affirmation.
Okay. Now, I think you just said that Iris Wildtime was by Andy Lane, which Andy is on our mind since we both just talked to him. Don't you mean Paul Mars?
No, Paul Mars allowed Andy Lane to write a story in Cwej Down the Middle.
Okay.
So Chris and Iris are, they're working on, that's what I was saying, the entire story was about another separate case of spontaneous human combustion, where Iris and Chris are investigating it and learning that it has to do with, an underwater experimental aquarium and a car park. It's a really interesting story. There's so many different twists and turns that it goes into. Chris and Iris basically meet the Slender Man somehow. It's very strange.
Oh, really?
Yeah, it's I would really recommend anybody, if you're wanting to read one story from Cwej Down the Middle, read that one. It really highlights Andy's craft, I would think. So that's I reached out to a whole bunch of different people. Andy reached out to a whole bunch of different people. He referenced, the Houthi from Love and War. Just a few really interesting things that he managed to do. That we both managed to do, and so he and I were basically, we were a lot more kind of, I don't know what the word would be. We were a lot more collaborative about where Chris would go back then. Right now, he's a bit hands off. He's a bit like, you are, doing a great job. I have confidence that you'll continue to do a great job. So he's basically given me the reins. And that tweet I sent you about how, that tweet that I sent you about the, Big Finish using Chris without permission. Andy basically said at this point, like he said this in direct message, he said, at this point, I basically see you as the person with the rights to Chris and Roz, or something,
Wow.
something along those lines. And that was one of the most honoring things I've ever heard.
Wow. Yeah, and Andy is a gem. I actually had the opportunity of meeting his wife, Helen Sterling Lane, who is a British actor, and doing an interview with her as well. And there's a huge amount of talent right there in that family. What a nice thing. What an absolutely wonderful thing to hear. Is everything going okay there in your setting? Everything good?
Yeah, for the recording, I'm at a public library right now, and there's a guy over there who is, on a call. I don't want to disturb him, so
Okay,
I'm
gotcha.
just, yeah. So,
Okay.
yeah, the entire thing with the story of Down the Middle is that Chris has, basically taken in these two young adults. They're like in their early 20s. And they've fled from home after basically destroying their planet in a childish act of revenge for, their backward society kind of going at them. Like, one of them is non-binary, and this society on this alien planet's very, very, very anti that. So Chris basically takes in these two aliens. He, is good friends with them. They're his best friends, and in the story, Chris and his friends, their names are Laurels and Cole. So Laurels and Cole are, basically traveling with him, uh, focusing on things that he's trying to get done for his superiors, and we know who those are. You know, it's not hidden or anything. They're um, but basically the superiors, the Time Lords, the Great Houses, whatever you want to call them, are sending him on missions to keep the totality, or the universe, intact. And Chris is basically um, you know trying to solve different issues with universal stability, and that's the kind of things, like, he is fighting to keep the universe stable, but the universe has been very cruel to a lot of different people, including his friends. So should he keep it stable, or should he keep it fair? And that's where the moral dilemma comes in. And then it just gets worse and worse and worse from there, with him going through all sorts of adversity and challenges, sometimes with the universe and his friends' lives at stake. And he has to choose between the two. So
Okay.
yeah.
Okay, very good. Now we're going to finish up here. We've ran over the hour that I asked you for, and thank you for being able to meet with me, using the public library setting. And I do want to do the little meet your author section, that way people can get to know you. But
Yeah.
what I was wondering, when you and I were chatting, when setting up this interview, I had mentioned to you that I admire the works of Paul Mars.
Yeah.
And you had mentioned Paul Mars, who, in my opinion, I don't want to say that I'm a fan of Paul Mars, because fan is actually short for a fanatic,
Yeah. Yeah.
which doesn't really have a positive connotation unless you just take it for face value, fan. But I admire his works. And the Nest Cottage series with Tom Baker, where Paul wrote all of those stories, that is something that I was able to jump off deeply, escapism wise, during COVID lockdown in particular. And if I had to name a favorite Doctor Who series of mine, and I've been a fan since the 80s, I would have to say that it is Nest Cottage by Paul Mars. So obviously, yes, I admire that writer. I can recognize his sense of humor. If somebody were to give me an Andy Lane story and a Paul Mars story, that had not been published, or it didn't have a title or whatever, and told me, read this and read that, which one's by Andy Lane and which one's by Paul Mars? Well, first I would know the Andy Lane story by the food references, but I would also know the Paul Mars story by the very genuine, unique sense of humor that he puts into his stories. And I'm wondering, what has your interaction with Paul Mars been like?
Nothing but positive. He is the most lovely, most kind person. He's written a bonus story that we're going to include in the hardback.
Oh, nice.
And that's going to come out whenever. The hardback is kind of up in the air in terms of a release date, but we hope to get it out in early 2024. So yeah, Paul Mars, he's also done, art of Chris with Panda, from the Iris Wildtime series. He's just a lovely guy. I have nothing but positive stuff to say about him. If you get him on the podcast, that would be one I would be most interested in hearing, because he's got some great stories, nonfiction and fiction, and I'm sure he could give you some really interesting things to talk about. Yeah.
Well, I can tell you this right now. When I started this interview series, which it was just over a year ago, the first person I interviewed was Will Hadcroft, who had just recently had his first Doctor Who story published by BBC Audio. And he had been working on it for literally decades. And I had only planned on doing a couple of interviews before realizing that, hey, this is really fun. And I've always sort of had this dream, goal, desire to actually interview Paul Mars. Because who wouldn't want to interview one of their own personal favorite authors? And for the people that are not familiar with the Nest Cottage Chronicles, it's a rather large group of stories that
14, I think.
are, yeah, I think it is 14. It has they are full cast audio dramas where Tom Baker is the Doctor. So I would absolutely highly recommend those, as well as any other Paul Mars stories. Okay, so Hunter, let's wrap this up, but let me get to the section of Meet Your Author. Typically, I will ask an open-ended question, such as who you are and what an average day in life is like for you, which you can answer. Some people think that's a little bit too personal. And another question that I like to ask people is when did you start watching Doctor Who, and who's your doctor? So, pick from one of those or both if you wish, and if you have time.
Well, I guess in terms of who I am and what my day to day is, I'm Hunter. I work at Starbucks. I write when am caffeinated because that's basically the only time I get the motivation.
Working on some caffeine here myself right now.
Oh, very good. Um, I have two dogs, a brother. I you know, I'm I guess if I had to go through like a day to day, I wake up at like 10 a.m. And I uh, uh, work on my stories. I work at my job, and I spend time with my family. That's basically the three things that I spend my time on the most. And That's basically all I can really think of in terms of what I do, all the time.
Okay.
I watch TV, obviously, Doctor Who. And that brings us to the second question. I was 12 years old. I'm currently 23. I was 12 years old when I saw somebody with like a wristband, like a rubber wristband, and it was I Two Hearts Doctor Who, or DW, and I was like, what does that mean? I asked them, and they went into a whole spiel about what Doctor Who is, um, and I was like, okay, this sounds very strange. I'm going to have to watch it. So I watched the first episode, and I'm like, this is ridiculous. This is so strange, and I couldn't stop watching it. Um, and eventually, I went into the classic series, and I just ate it all up. It is the weirdest, most bizarre, most wonderful, fantastic show. I'm never going to stop loving it. Um, Honestly, I would say it's my first love and my greatest love. Uh, so Doctor Who, that's what I how I got into it. Is just in high school somebody had a rubber wristband. Um, and then favorite Doctor, probably the third or fifth. I love Pertwee. I love Davison. Um, yeah, they're great people. I mean, obviously I haven't met Pertwee, right? I wasn't alive. But yeah, he and Davison are my two favorite doctors. They're great actors. Their scripts were great, and they did wonders for bringing the character to new heights. So
Okay. That's amazing. That's that is something I have never heard before. That you became a Doctor Who fan by seeing someone wearing a wristband here in America.
that's the thing. In Iowa, it's a huge thing. We have something called UNIT, the United something of Iowan Time Lords. Iowa is
Really?
huge when it comes to Doctor Who. The thing about Iowa is that I think it's, besides BBC, I think it is um the place that it's our public network or whatever. It's the longest consecutive run of Doctor Who is Iowa Public Television. Um,
Wow.
yeah, so they've been airing Doctor Who for ages, and that's why there are so many really huge fans in Iowa. You know, obviously Lars Pearson, as we mentioned, but just a whole bunch of people. And I'd say there's more giant, massive Doctor Who fans in Iowa than there are anywhere else in the U.S. So that's
Wow.
yeah. Maybe that's why
So
there's something in Chicago, right?
yeah, no doubt, because it's close. You know, I would love to go to that Chicago convention sometime.
Mm.
I've never actually been to a convention. I've been to typical all-inclusive sci-fi conventions. In fact, I've
Mm.
even worked at one that has run for over 30 years as
Mm.
as a volunteer. So that is really interesting to hear. Now, as far as the celebrities, the actors, who have you had an opportunity to meet?
Sylvester McCoy, David Tennant. He signed my box set of 10th Doctor novels. That was an adventure. I've only spoken to Peter Davison in the hallway of the convention saying hi, and he said hi. So, I mean, I
Okay.
count that. I count that. Pearl Mackie. That can't be it. There has to be more that I'm not thinking of.
Was
Um,
Katie Manning at that?
Katie Manning, of course. Katie
Yeah,
Manning. I've
right.
spoken to her a
Who?
lot. Yeah, I've spoken
Right.
to her on the phone privately. She's
Oh,
lovely.
really?
Yeah, so I've spoken
Yeah.
to Katie Manning. We were wanting to work on a video project at some point featuring Iris, which fell through, sadly. But hopefully, at some point, we can at least get, you know, some semblance of a video Iris, right?
Right.
So yeah, Katie is lovely. I've talked to her a whole bunch. She has this intense love for Doctor Who that honestly rivals you or I. Um,
Right.
yeah. All right. I don't want to take up too much of your time, but it was great. It was fantastic to
Yeah.
speak with you, see Andy for a little bit. He and I were actually meaning to meet in the United Kingdom, but he was super busy
Oh,
with his personal stuff going on. Yeah.
okay.
But yeah, it was so great to see him. But thank you so much for being on here.
Yeah, Hunter, thank you. It was great to meet you. And where do you like to be found online, and where can people order your works?
Good question. I'm on Facebook mostly. I rarely ever
Okay.
use Twitter or X.
Hmm.
So Facebook is Hunter O'Connell. I also usually post on Discord, the messaging platform.
Hmm.
Uh, my handle is Hunter JOC, and my what was it? Oh right, you asked where my work can be found. Currently we have it on Amazon, but we are trying to kind of distance ourselves from their print on demand service and actually get it, printed like a regular publisher.
Okay.
So we are working on that, but currently you can find it all on Amazon or on our, um, you know, our independent ebook service website.
Okay.
So yeah,
Okay. Okay. And for the links that you just mentioned, we're going to go ahead and put those down below. So for the people listening to this on audio, go to YouTube and type in Hunter O'Connell, the Timescales interviews, and you will find the original version of this video interview. Look down below in the notes, and you're going to find the links. And I would absolutely suggest that you definitely check out the works of Hunter O'Connell, because there's a very good chance that you will find something that you will love. Hunter,
oh,
thank
thank
you
you
so
so much.
much. It's great to meet you. And
All right, great to meet you as
uh,
well.
yeah, let's keep in touch.
Absolutely. This was wonderful. I hope we can do it again sometime. But thank you
Absolutely.
so much, and I will. All right, I'll see you later.
Okay,
Bye
take
bye.
care. Yep, bye-bye.